Hello, everybody, and welcome back. It is time once again for another episode of Blitz Boys. Slade and I are here to break down what we thought would just be a national championship game has now devolved into an entire coaching search as Nick Saban has announced his retirement. So we're going to talk about that as well. We have a huge episode to dive into, a lot to talk about. We're excited to bring it to you. So without dragging this out any longer, let's dive into this week's episode of Blitz Boys. Starting off this week, we're going to go back. We're going to start with Monday. We're going to talk about the national championship game first, and then we will work our way towards the Nick Saban news that broke. So first up, obviously, congratulations to Michigan. They win their first national championship since 1997. Everybody's still throwing out the asterisks. One thing to mention before we dive into our recap of the game, while I don't believe this fully exonerates Michigan, and I still believe there's an investigation going on. The NCAA president did come out and say that they won the national championship fair and square. In my eyes, I believe that's just saying, like, listen, we don't think they were cheating anymore since we first started investigating them. I think they're still investigating them for everything that happened before. Still think there's a possibility of wins being vacated, and we'll have to see what happens with the rest of it. But I do believe that the NCAA president has just come out and saying, "Listen, they won this game fair and square. We believe it's fine." So it'll be interesting to see where this goes from here. Slade, your thoughts on that comment, and then just your general thoughts on the game and everything that happened.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on that is that if it ends up coming out like JJ McCarthy claims before and after the game that everyone is doing this and that they actually caught wind of it when Ohio State started doing it to them apparently, and that's when they started doing it. Kind of pointing the finger back at Ohio State is what they're doing. If that's the case, they played three of their toughest in-season games with an FBI investigation going on and not being able to cheat, and then played the playoffs against Alabama and that dynasty, beat them in overtime, and then go and put on a show in the championship game. So I mean, they played five very tough games to end their season, all while under this investigation. Three of which without their coach. I think that when you talk about the last five games of the season, yeah, they definitely did it fair and square. I think. And just the fact that Michigan was able to start those five games, that 5 game run out against Penn State, and do it one dimensional, just run the ball the entire second half, and then kind of do that in the first half against Washington. I mean, the first quarter, I think they averaged 19 yards a carry. At halftime, it was 12 yards a carry. They end the game with over 300 yards rushing, and set a college football championship record, right, with their rushing yards. It was
Yeah.
303 yards. Yeah, I just think that the fact that this team could literally just shut their quarterback down in terms of throwing the ball at any point and just have Corum and Edwards, right, switching back and forth. I mean, the fact that both of them got multiple touchdowns in the game also is crazy. But yeah, I think that them being able to just kind of not throw the ball and just run and the team know what's coming and not be able to stop it was a real eye opener, because I didn't think that they would be able to do it in the championship game. I just thought that Washington would have more for them defensively.
Yeah, definitely. And this is another thing I wanted to talk about is I apologize, and I said I would do this last week if Michigan came out and they had a great defensive game. I apologize to the Big Ten defenses and shitting on them, saying that they weren't that good. They their stats are overinflated because they play horrible Big Ten offenses. Maybe that's the case for the West because we just watched Iowa get completely dismantled, and the same with some other Big Ten West schools. But still, the fact that Michigan was able to go out there, um, and I will say, and Penix said this in his interview afterwards. He's like, "Oh, they didn't beat us; we beat ourselves." I think that's a little bullshit, but Washington's offense definitely did not look the same as it has. Even if you, I mean, Penix was missing wide open throws, and as the game went on, they got more and more pressure. He took some hits. It definitely looked like he was getting hurt more and more as the game continued to go on. I don't know if that played a factor in it, but it was definitely very strange to see, and we had talked about it coming into this game. Um, Washington loved the 50-50 ball, and they found ways to with this elevated receiving core, to take those 50-50 balls and make them all but guaranteed. And Michigan found a way to counteract that. And as somebody that watched this Washington receiving core torch us with those balls all year, it was nice to see it like just kind of not work anymore. And it's like, all right, like cool. But still, like I'm not gonna sit here and harp on Washington and make fun of them and stuff because obviously they made it to where a lot of schools want to get to, and that's the national championship game. And through 3 quarters, they were in it. This was still their game. If they coulda just found, a couple offensive possessions to break through on, who knows how this game goes in the 4th quarter if they can get up a score and then make Michigan play catch up because from the 2nd quarter through the 3rd quarter, Michigan's offense did not exist. They had multiple 3 and outs, they could not move the ball. It took a huge 3rd down run from McCarthy to get their first down, I think, in 4 possessions. Um and even that drive eventually stalled out, and then finally, I think it was the next drive that they broke through. They had a nice drive. They get down there and they score. Um, you know, if they're able to flip again 1 or 2 of those possessions, who knows how this game ends up. Um, and back to the whole, and we're going to talk about McCarthy and Harbaugh and everybody here in a minute. Um, but it was Washington's defense looked very good as a whole, and they made very nice adjustments as the game went on too. Again, they really found ways to kind of stifle that run after they had that explosive first quarter. I think it was the first 4 drives, where Michigan couldn't be stopped, and then all of a sudden Washington found a way. One stat I did see, so Washington was the 3rd team to enter the college football championship with a win streak of 20 plus games. It was 2017 Alabama and 2020 Clemson. Both of those other teams lost, which was a very interesting statistic to see. And now Washington.
Wait, what was the statistic? Sorry, what teams with over 15 wins?
Now Washington was the 3rd team to enter a college football championship game with win streaks of 20 plus CFP championship. Uh, enter the game with a win streak of 20 plus games. The other two were 2017 Alabama and 2020 Clemson. Uh,
Georgia doesn't qualify for that last
they didn't
year.
win the championship. They won.
Oh, I see what you're saying. And
I
so these
also
three
no
teams
last
lost.
year. Last
No,
year
they wouldn't
coming
have
in.
been over 20. They wouldn't have been over 20
Yeah,
going into that.
exactly.
You're
Yeah.
right.
Okay. I
Sorry.
mean, ESPN tell me the stat, so I mean, if it's wrong,
No, no,
ESPN.
you're no. I'm sorry.
Which wouldn't be the first time. Um, but yeah, again, just an interesting stat. Um, Speaking of stats, what was the most shocking stat from the game as a whole to you?
Um, the most shocking stat is Washington only having like 40 yards of rush offense. One thing two gripes I had for Washington in this game also. The first one is them kind of harping and kind of sticking with the fact that had that dude not got tripped up on his feet and caught that wide open pass that Penix probably overthrew a little bit, maybe by a step, but the guy
Mhm.
still, tripped his feet up. It was a big play. But the fact that they're claiming that that would have changed the entire, I mean, you could have done the same thing the next drive and didn't. And, that and the fact that they started the game out with a hurt running back and they decided to just hand the ball off to him every play. I mean,
Yeah,
I would have assumed that it would have been best, kind of try and spread the ball out to the receivers, maybe some swing passes, different things like that, and then hand the ball off and hope that he gets a couple of breakaways. No, they were just handing the ball to this dude. He was on the ground in pain, and the lineman just lifting him up, being like, "All right, you're gonna get the ball again. Get back there." Like he's going off the field. They're rewrapping his ankle. He's coming back on the field, and they're going at it again. I just it was like they were putting a lamb out there for execution. I just didn't understand that part
yeah,
of that, but that went into the fact that their star running back is hurt, and that's probably why they ended up with about 40 yards of rushing offense in the game.
46. Yeah.
46, yeah.
Um, and when I blanked earlier, I was trying to think of what I wanted to say, and this is what it was. Is there was a lot of complaining, and there still is from the Washington side about the referees, and I do agree. I think the referees were horrible. But I watched the game objectively from the side with, I mean, what I would want to call, I didn't have any persuasion in the game. Did I want Washington to lose? Yeah, of course. But I mean, whatever was going to happen was going to happen. I felt like there was a fair amount of missed calls against Michigan as well. This is an ACC crew. I don't know what the fuck anybody expected because ACC refs suck, and that was on full fucking display again. And while yeah, there's pictures, there's video evidence, all this other shit, showing that Washington got hosed. That's just the side of being a loser. And I mean, again, I feel like Michigan would have equal amount of gripes had they lost. I think back to when Washington beat Washington State in the Apple Cup. There was blatant missed calls on Washington State multiple times. The one I think it might have been like a 75-yard touchdown play, or at least it was a huge play. Got Washington like inside the red zone. It was close to when like they were trying to seal up the game. There was like an illegal blindside block, a high low block. I think the picture was not on Sports Illustrated, but it was like the headline picture, whatever. And you could see the defensive lineman like getting pulled from behind as the running back goes around them, and it's like karma comes very fast. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I'll say this: I feel like the refereeing was horrible both sides. Maybe Michigan got a couple extra breaks, but there was again just I feel like bad calls all around. Other people were complaining about the targeting that got overturned. I Targeting is such a bullshit rule anymore. But when you have the ESPN guy immediately jumping on saying, "Yeah, no, this isn't targeting," I'm kind of inclined to believe him. But again, the parameters of targeting rules anymore, I feel like are just bullshit. And so that's my thoughts on the. That's what I wanted to say about the refereeing. Back to the stats. Um, the fact that Michigan had 140 passing yards, I feel like was very surprising because it did not feel like it. Only about 115 yards less than Washington. And again, it felt like Washington was throwing the ball every play. They had 5 yards per pass attempt. Michigan had 7.4 yards per pass attempt, and mainly that was because of Roman Wilson had a huge gain. Can't think of. I want to say it's Lovemaker, but I know that's not his name. Uh, that's just the Loveland. I think it's Loveland. I don't know. Let me double. Yeah, Colson Loveland, the tight end. He had a huge 41-yard catch as well. Um, and those were kind of the plays that really propelled this Michigan offense back into getting their gears going and moving the ball. Were two huge completions to those two. And then of course you had the near pick six right at the end of the game as well. Um, and I did see another stat. That kind of blew my mind. Washington didn't take an offensive snap when they were trailing by less than 7 points. Yeah, less than 7 points. Every time they had the ball, it was 7 or more points that they were down by, which was very very surprising to me. Again, just watching this Washington team all year, and shout out to Jim Harbaugh for again. We said this during or in the Rose Bowl when it went to halftime and the score was what it was. It's going to be who can make the better second half adjustments. The greatest college football coach of all time or Jim Harbaugh. And they both made excellent. It took until late until the fourth quarter for that game to kind of break. Whereas this one, DeBoer is a very good head coach.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we saw that shine through the way he was able to get his team to rally. But that second half adjustment that Michigan made, and I don't know what it is about that third quarter break. That Harbaugh or the coordinators, whoever, that when they talk to the team, Harbaugh's teams have always been a very good fourth quarter team as well. So it was a very fun game to watch. Um, Looking at the future of Michigan, and as we start to talk about the coaching carousel turning and everything that might happen here. Um, do you think it's a possibility that both JJ McCarthy and Jim Harbaugh are gone? Do you think they'll both be back? Do you think one of them will be back? What are your thoughts on both of them? Because apparently JJ McCarthy's name is popping up on NFL draft boards. I have my own thoughts on this, but I want to let you talk about it first. Do you see either of them coming back, one or both?
Um, so I think that JJ McCarthy comes back. I think the QB market is saturated this year. I think that also the teams that are available, I mean, I know this is every year, but the teams that usually have the first pick, you know, aren't good at the time. But no offense to your Bears, they have multiple picks. So I mean, I wouldn't want to go to the Bears right now. I wouldn't want to go to the Panthers right now. I wouldn't want to go to a lot of these teams that are kind of looking for possibly a quarterback or someone that could sit there. Uh, I mean, if I'm him, I don't think that going to the NFL right now is the best option. I don't think that he's better than Caleb Williams or um, Bo Nix or Penix or whoever, whoever you want to put on the draft board, whoever hasn't committed yet. So I just think that he would have a better opportunity to come back, even if it's not under Jim Harbaugh, and put together a really good season. Now, whether they get back to the playoffs, you don't know because they're adding two teams that would have made the 12-team playoff this year to their conference. So it's going to be much more difficult. But yeah, I think that he comes back for another season and tries to pad some stats, possibly go after to get into the Heisman race. I mean, I don't think that right now he's good enough to get into that conversation, but possibly after another season. Jim Harbaugh, I think that he is gone, in my opinion. I think that he came back to his alma mater. He did what he wanted to do. He brought a championship. There's so much going on and off the field that involves his name at the university, and the university is not taking any repercussions for any of this. Really, he's the only one that's getting benched or getting a game. You're not on the field. You're without pay. You're suspended. All this, and I think that he's best to just go back to the NFL, get get out of Michigan, in my opinion.
Yeah. Sorry, my microphone decided it wants to not cooperate. I I'll start with JJ McCarthy like you did. I think it'd be best for him to stay in college, and that's not even from a draft perspective. He's at best, he is a career backup in the NFL. And I wholeheartedly believe, especially now with the national championship, we're going to see him in 5 years having his own car dealership in somewhere near Ann Arbor, Michigan, or I believe he was born and raised in Michigan. So I think that's where we see him in 5 to 10 years with a nice car dealership. Go ahead.
I think you're right. I think he was like on the border of Ohio because he grew up an Ohio State fan but wasn't recruited. So then that was a deal before the Michigan Ohio State game
Yeah,
was that he wasn't recruited by Ohio State.
yeah, um, but yeah. So I mean, and just watching the national championship game, yeah, he did find ways to make plays and so on, but that offense was revolved around the running backs. I don't think, and maybe he ends up proving us wrong, and I don't think he'll be the next Tom Brady, but what who knows? But I think he'd be well served to just have a fantastic college career, come back again, maybe because Donovan Edwards is lined up to be the premier back for, and we've obviously seen how explosive he is. I felt very bad that he everybody was calling Blake Corum a goal line merchant. I don't think that's what the case was. I mean, we've seen very clear cases of him having fantastic running vision, and he was just a little bit more of a power back compared to Edwards, who was your let's get to the outside and go, and that's what we saw
Mm-hmm.
in the national championship game. But next year, Edwards is going to be that premier back. He's going to get just about all the looks, and so this offense is still going to be very top of the line. I guess is what I'm trying to say. And they have a lot of great defensive pieces coming back. I think until somebody this they're entering Utah territory for me. Where obviously Utah had a down year this year, but until somebody shows that they can beat Michigan or that Michigan isn't at the top of their game, I can't pick against them in the Big Ten, even with everybody coming in. Because again, we had this discussion before. Oh, like how are these Big Ten teams going to adapt to the Pac-12 teams coming in with this spread style, high paced offense that we've seen for so many years, and or is are the Pac-12 teams going to have to adjust to the Big Ten teams and how they play and all this other stuff? We got a very clear answer on Monday night, and we were texting about this too. And the conversation is, wow, how are these Big Ten defenses going to deal with the Pac-12 offenses? The question is, how the hell are these Pac-12 defenses going to deal with the Big Ten offenses? Um, and so I think they should absolutely be favorites again. And I think McCarthy would be very wise to just come back, use his last year, and see what happens. Maybe they make the playoffs. Maybe they go to the national championship again. Maybe they win again. As far as Harbaugh, while there obviously is a lot of scrutiny around him, at Michigan, like you said. I feel like once they clear this hurdle, it's I don't see anything else popping up. The first suspension he got this year, I feel like was total bullshit. He got to recruit a hamburger, and he has to serve a 3 game suspension. I didn't agree with that at all, but I mean that it is what it is. And obviously, you have the sign stealing, where yeah, it's frowned upon. But again, as we said from the beginning, you can't tell me this is the only school doing it. Maybe to that extent that they did it, um, maybe, but and now it's started to come out that hey, maybe they weren't the only ones doing it. But he has a lifetime, essentially. I know it's not signed or anything, but he has a lifetime contract with the University of Michigan. The president of the school absolutely loves this man. I don't know how his relationship with the athletic director is, especially with everything that's happened. But I think he has a home at Michigan. Whereas if you go back to the NFL, obviously he's had success there before, but he's also had a lot of downside to that as well. I think it's safer for him to stay at Michigan, but again, if the pressure is getting too much with the investigation or whatever happens from here, and if the money is right and he gets the proper control from an NFL team, like he gets to be acting GM or whatever, like we just saw Belichick do for how many years. I mean, if the situation's right, I see him leaving. Your source said we're going to find out next week, early next week, apparently. um, so it'll be interesting to see. I think it'd be best for both of them to stay in college. But I think McCarthy ultimately leaves. And then I think Harbaugh does too. Whereas again, I think both of them should stay. I think they both end up leaving.
What do you think if he were to go to Chicago and then the Bears with their second pick took McCarthy?
Well, so the Bears have already come out and said that they're sticking with Eberflus for a year or for another year. So we
Oh,
won't.
really? Oh, never
Yeah,
mind. Sorry.
yeah. But I don't think Harbaugh would be dumb enough to take McCarthy with this, their second first round pick. I think as much as he hyped him up, and I know we got into this debate a little bit last week, with him coming out saying McCarthy's the best quarterback Michigan's ever had. I think he very well understands that there is better quarterbacks on the market, and I think Justin Fields is a far better quarterback than what JJ McCarthy is.
Yeah, I
But
think that the game also has proven that the NFL is much different than college football. You
yeah,
don't see as many guys from college going straight in, like, having a stellar, transition. A lot of these guys are having a very, very tough transition.
except for CJ Stroud apparently. um, Moving on, next thing I wanted to talk about, give me your way too early prediction for the 2024-2025 national champion. And then we can revisit this in a year, see how wrong we were. But just give me a team. Who do you think is going to win it all next year?
So I had one that I liked. It was gonna be Ohio State, who is who I picked this year, but they signed Alabama's center, hit the dude that snaps the ball to the quarterback at his knees every time. Now in 1,800 snaps, he only gave up 1 sack, but I'm just not quite sure that what's his name, Howard, Will Howard. I'm
Yeah.
not quite sure that he's going to be able to get down to his ankles to get that ball. So I'm going with Ole Miss. I think that Lane Kiffin has done like what every other coach wants to do with this transfer portal and the NIL stuff. And I think that a lot of teams will end up, kind of mirroring after if this works for Ole Miss.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, he went out and got a ton of people that they needed, and it wasn't just like, oh, let's go sign the biggest names. It was let's sign the biggest names at our spots that we need while keeping our guys here.
Mhm.
And then they go out and uh, handily beat Penn State in the bowl game, and then now it's no telling what the team that he's bringing in is going to do. I mean, they got a lot going for them.
Yeah. I will say, back to the Ohio State point, at least they did sign Quinshad Junkins, which was a huge
Mm-hmm.
uh, player to walk away from Ole Miss, which I was very surprised about. And obviously, Ohio State's run game is going to be in good hands. We're still waiting to see if Henderson comes back on top of that. Um, and as far as the center giving up only 1 sack on 1,800 snaps, it's very hard to give up a sack when the quarterback just has to either fall on a ball or run for his life immediately. So that's all I'll say about the sack stat. My way too early pick, Oregon. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that to myself. I'm going to go with Georgia. I think coming off of everything that happened this year, they still have a ton of talent returning. I think with Saban gone, they're going to be the class of the SEC. It'll be interesting to see. Again, I want to see a heavy reliance on the transfer portal work out first. In Ole Miss's situation, because what we saw last year with Colorado, and again, I understand first year head coach at this level. Obviously, he brought in a ton of young talent, and it's very hard to get that all to work. What 50, 55 new players in 1 year? It's hard to get that to work, and I understand that. But yeah, I mean, I even look at Texas A&M bringing in, and while it's recruiting versus transfer portal, bringing in a ton of top tier talent and still failing to get it to work. Let me see it progress first before I fully buy into that. I'm not saying Kiffin can't do it. Um, and I still have a lot of questions across the board for this team, and if they can show up in big moments like we saw them missing a lot of times this year. So I for now I'm still going to put Georgia at the top of the SEC. But I am very excited to see what Oregon can do next year with the recruits they brought in, with the transfer portal additions they brought in, and we'll talk about coaching here in a minute.
One thing I wanted
Go ahead.
to say about us both picking SEC teams is I like that you picked an SEC team. When they went to the playoff format, the SEC kind of got caught flat footed, not really immediately ready for the transition, it looked like, in terms of the entire conference. I don't think they get caught like that again. I think that they're going to be above what you see with these other conferences right from the start. I think that they realize that money is what's going to drive this whole new way of college football, and I think that they're going to be right on top of that right away, and they're going to be better prepared for this 12-team playoff. And I think that them in the Big Ten will get the same amount of teams into the playoff, but it just seems like in the end of the season games like that, they're ready to play. Alabama shouldn't have been in the playoff yet; they went to the overtime with the national champions.
Yeah. Um. So that perfectly leads us into what I want to talk about next. Is um throughout the history of college football, we've seen dynasties come and go. And while you have individual team dynasties, there's also been conference dynasties. It used to be the Big 12 way back in the day. It used to be the SEC farther back than that. It was the Big 10 for a while. To me, and I feel like you obviously just gave your viewpoint on this. To me, especially with Saban leaving, and Saban being the cornerstone. Now, I'm not saying Georgia can't pick up, right where Alabama left off, but across the board, it feels like the SEC as a whole has started to kind of not necessarily fall back, or I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. I feel like everybody else is starting to catch up to the SEC a little bit, especially the Big Ten with the teams that the Big Ten is adding. I mean, you look at who's coming in: Oregon, Washington, USC. Um, UCLA is coming in, but I'm not going to mention them in the same breath as the other three. Um, but you look at who's coming in, you look at who's already there: Ohio State, Michigan, Maryland is on a little bit of a come up. Penn State is always going to be kind of mentioned at the top there. One thing about Maryland is you look at their bowl game; they just mollywopped an SEC school, and everybody else is talking about, well, yeah, Ole Miss stomped Penn State. Fair, and I agree with that. But looking outside of the opt outs and stuff, I also look at LSU played Wisconsin. Wisconsin was a bottom tier or mid tier, I guess I should say, Big Ten school, and they almost beat LSU. LSU turned on fired their defense coordinator because of it. I think it obviously more led into that, but I think that was the final nail in the coffin, giving up 35 points to Wisconsin. Um, but then Tennessee, that's what I was trying to. Tennessee played Iowa, and they were
Mm-hmm.
bragging, "Oh, we shut them out 35-0." The fact you only scored 35 is okay. I wouldn't get too excited. Obviously, that they are very excited about their upcoming quarterback, and that's something we'll talk about later. Um, but the SEC schools that beat the Big Ten schools were kind of pounding their chest, but I'm also saying they're going, well, look at who you're playing. Like you're a top five SEC school playing Iowa finished number 2 in the Big Ten. No, they won their division in the Big Ten, which was on the verge of needing 7 tiebreakers to get to that point anyway. Um, I just feel across the board, I feel like the Big Ten is getting better and better and starting to catch the SEC. You kind of answered it, but any other thoughts that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I'm going with the SEC and saying that they're not going to be, knocked off that that pedestal that we kind of all see them on these last couple of years. I think the Big Ten has brought in four of the Pac-12 teams, and I think that the first thing they're going to take on is everyone's going to beat everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I think that USC is going to turn it around. Lincoln Riley is going to have a team that is capable of being on the field with these teams. Their defense will never be good, but their offense will always be capable of putting 50 points up. And that's not something that the current Big Ten teams can all say. So he's going to be able to get over 500, I think, easily.
Yeah.
Oregon, massive, massive recruiting, a lot of great talent. And like you said, landing another great coach that he's going to be able to easily get over 500. I think that you're going to see the top three of the Big Ten, those two teams that are definitely going to be these huge competitors. And then you still have Maryland, who every year is counted out, yet they keep inching closer and closer to being in the same conversation. Obviously not right away, but I think that the fact that there is the possibility of being six teams that could all beat one another, it's going to be that cannibalism that I talked about all season with Pac-12. I think that they're all going to end up going into the postseason and make it. Three teams will make the playoffs, but there's only be none of them will be undefeated. Everyone's going to have a loss. It's going to be like the Pac-12, I think. In previous years, obviously Washington got through unscathed this year, but whereas I think that the SEC has a lot of great teams, just like the Big Ten, but I think that there's going to be two teams that set themselves a little bit ahead of the rest, and it'll be, like you said, Georgia. Who knows if it'll be Ole Miss? Who knows if Alabama will hire, who they'll bring in? Who knows about Texas or Oklahoma and what they'll bring to the table? But I think that there's still only going to be two teams that are able to raise above the rest in the SEC, whereas I think that there's the opportunity of like four teams being the top team in the Big Ten, and they're all going to have to play each other.
Yeah. I mean, looking at that point of, like you said, the Big Ten bringing in some of that cannibalism from the Pac-12, I could honestly start to see that happen in the SEC too, and maybe that's
Mm-hmm.
what leads to more of a balancing act between them. And I think across the board, obviously having a 12-team playoff helps. And like you said, I think it's a disappointing year if for the conferences. I'll say,
Mm-hmm.
obviously for the fans, I don't think we really give a shit to that extent. But for the conferences, Big Ten, SEC especially, I think it's a disappointment if they don't get three teams each in.
Yeah, I
I
think if
think
they
if
don't have
they,
half the playoff teams, like you're saying, it's a disappointment.
yeah, I mean, both of them would love to have. Hey, I mean, everybody, we get the four. If we go to the 7 and 5, we get the four Power Four conferences in. We get the top Group of Five school, and then what? I think at that point it's fighting of, do we get the next three spots? Do we get somebody in the next three spots? Obviously, with the voting this year, the SEC would have got a good amount of schools in,
Mm-hmm.
but so would the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. The 12 teams definitely going to make it interesting, but like I said, I think those benchmarks um, are going to make it, or are going to be expectations for these conferences going forward. Um, Next thing we want to talk about is obviously the big news that broke yesterday. I mean, I texted you guys immediately when I saw this. I did like triple take. I was like, "There's no way this is real." Like this, because it's just a random Wednesday afternoon. There was no, "Hey, there's a press conference at Alabama coming up," and so on and so forth. It was just popped up on our phones and said Nick Saban's retiring and leaving Alabama, and we're like, "Holy shit! Holy shit!" Um, so first of all, Nick Saban, goodbye. Um, as fans of other schools, we're not sad to see you go, but as fans of college football, we definitely are. In my eyes, I think he's definitely earned the right to be called the greatest of all time. Your thoughts on the announcement when it broke, and then we'll get into who we think's replacing him and some of the other stuff that has happened since then. But first, just your general thoughts on the news breaking, and so on.
I mean, social media makes things like these difficult to follow because, like you said, you broke the news in the group chat to me. I don't know if you probably broke it to Nick as well at the time, but um, so I get online. The first video I see is a TikTok of this guy saying that Nick Saban is stepping down because his wife Terry has medical issues, and they decided that it's best for him to step away at this point because her diagnosis doesn't look good. Nobody else has said anything about that the rest of the time. So that was the first video that I saw, thinking that poor Miss Terry, who's on the sidelines kissing the Alabama players on the cheek every week, like she's team mom, like handing out their
Mhm.
sandwiches and their orange slices. Yeah, you think that something's wrong with her, and that's horrible news and everything, and then it comes out like, no, that's not the case. Like he just is 72 years old and realized that these type of seasons like this one takes a lot out
Yeah.
of you to be the best. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that it's crazy. The fact that I was looking over at he's like 209 and 29 or something like that, or 204 and 29. He's got like an 87% win percentage. It's crazy. And the fact that it also happened the same day as Belichick, in 24, or yeah, in what is it, 24 seasons, there was a 50% chance that one of their teams was going to win the national championship or the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
They have
Yeah.
12 of 24 of the possible championships. Just ridiculous. It is crazy. I didn't think that this would happen, this soon. It seemed like
Mhm.
he's still loving football and doing great at it, obviously, but um, it is interesting. The dude makes a lot of money
Yeah.
off the field. He's got multiple car dealerships. He doesn't really need football, but like he had said, you become a football coach and you think you're going to do it for life.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely shocking. Not what I had, and especially like I said, there was no signs of it. It was not like, hey, it was always something that fans kind of brought up, like, hey, he's kind of get up there in age. Like, is he gonna ever retire? But usually something of this magnitude when it gets ready to break. Again, there's signs leading up to it. To me, I didn't see any signs. I mean, I thought with the Rose Bowl loss, he was going to come back more pissed off and more ready to go next year, and want to go out on a high. Um, and the other thing that's shocking to me is, um, with how it was broken is the power vacuum it's created, and again, we'll talk about coaches here in a second. But one thing I am excited for is, I mean, he did an interview with Reese Davis today, and they talked all about it. And he's mentioned that he wants to get into broadcasting possibly, and I would love that. I mean, when he went on Pat McAfee show this year, he had a lot of in depth, and he's enjoyable to listen talk to. I mean, I've listened to some of his speeches. I read his book. He can make very boring topics very interesting, and I think that's great, and that's going to translate very well into a broadcasting opportunity. Some people have also floated the idea of him replacing Lee Corso. So that'll be interesting. I don't think
He
he's going to put on
has
headgear though.
no, but it. I mean that speculation he has been going on. The Pat show that is on ESPN every Thursday, I think it is.
I think he goes on every Thursday.
And it's gained a lot of steam. Actually, they were asked about it today, I think, or yesterday, and they had said that they know that it is because they were like, oh, it's speculation that ESPN is signing him to something. And I think it was JJ Watt that asked about it, and they were like, well, I mean, I know that he's gained a lot of steam coming on the show and greeting us with his presence and everything, but we don't know anything, makes you think.
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite part of everything coming out though is, like, the ESPN executives must be really pissed off though, because if he would announced, "Hey, next year is gonna be my last year," they could have milked the shit out of that for viewers. So that they were a little upset that Nick Saban just broke the news. Um, let's get into the drama that's unfolded in the 24 hours now since, and that is a head coaching search for Alabama. Alabama AD spoke with the team and said, "Give us 72 hours before you make any decisions. If you want to transfer out, if and to the recruits coming in, if you want to decommit." Now, Alabama has already lost a commit, but that was only the one big one I've seen. Everybody else is just kind of hanging out and laying low. So that'll be interesting to see what happens from here. But the first three names that were thrown out were Steve Sarkisian, Dan Lanning, and Kalen DeBoer. One of those names is absolutely off the board, and we're going to talk about here in a second, and that is Dan Lanning. The other two, now we haven't heard Sarkisian speak on this at all. This one, it was, kind of highly spoke about at first because of his ties to Nick Saban. and the Alabama program as a whole. But the rumors have not gained any sort of traction at all. I think it was kind of overtaken without overboard. A lot of people went with the Dan Lanning rumors. There was a real news reporter said that he had a source that lives in Tuscaloosa that said he saw Dan Lanning in Tuscaloosa, and from there, shit went wild. Obviously, everybody kept saying, "Well, he's in Tuscaloosa. He's signing the contract. It's all but over." Multiple reliable sources tweeted, "Oh, the contract's written up. They're just they just need to put pen to paper. It's all but done." Um, as an Oregon fan, I was ready to call it quits. I mean, we survived the Texas A&M rumors. He came out and he gave very passionate speeches about why he's not leaving Eugene, and I believed him. But I believed coaches in the past, but they didn't have the resolve that he did when he spoke about it. But still, uh, I knew that there was still a chance, and it with a program like or on the level that Alabama is, when that job comes open, that's very, very hard to walk away from. Now we're not sure if he was even offered a contract. If I mean, I'm sure that they probably called him. Maybe they spoke on the phone, but again, we don't know if there was an actual job offer. But all Dan Lanning said is he was trying to watch a movie with the son, and his phone started blowing up. So he threw it on do not disturb, and all of a sudden son's phone is blowing up, and he's like, "Dad, are we moving to Tuscaloosa?" And he's like, "Will you shut up and watch the movie? Like, we're trying to have, like, bonding time here," which I thought was pretty funny when he gave his interview today. Um, but the video he put out, and then immediately after the video goes out, he goes on the Pat McAfee show to talk about it. Um, We've heard coaches deny rumors of going other places before. Some of them are true to their word. I have never seen a coach deny rumors to the extent that Dan Lanning has. And the way he speaks about not just the program, but the community he lives in, and how much his family loves Oregon now. Um, but the fact that he was able to turn it into a recruiting pitch, saying if you're not sure if your coach is going to leave, come play for us because I'm not going anywhere. Like I love this. I'm gonna be here until they kick me out essentially.
Hmm.
Um, that's why I'm so fired up for next year already. Like it's January and I can't wait for August to get here for football season to kick off. Because I'm bought all the way back in already. I'm ready to get hurt by Oregon football again. But again, just speaking to the how he presents himself and speaks, it very much so reminds me of, and I understand he worked for Saban for a year. I think it clearly rubbed off on him because the way he speaks and carries himself is very motivational. He could tell me to go paint my bedroom right now, and I would go do it, no questions asked, and I would do the best job I could for him. And that's why he's able to sign so many of these great kids to come play for him. Hey, Eugene is all the way out in bumfuck Oregon, and it's not the greatest place in the world to live, but we're gonna make it the greatest place. And he gets these kids to buy into his vision. I'm excited for where Oregon football is going. But as somebody on the outside, give me your thoughts on the. We'll talk about Lanning first, and then we'll kind of get into some of the other coaches. Um, but give me your thoughts on his denial of going anywhere and all that.
Yeah, so his denial was, I mean, he couldn't have said it any better or in any other way, I don't think. He first started out with, mentioning that he did get to be on Alabama's staff under Saban. He basically said that during that year, he felt as if he got a doctorate in coaching because like 8 of the top coaches in the nation right now were all on that staff at that time that he was like, bottom of the barrel in terms of like assistant coaches or an analyst or whatever, the deal is for with the names that were on that squad. Um, I I think also that the one guy that I saw that was trying to report on the different coaches and stuff said it best. Lanning has a $20 million buyout, which is massive. Now obviously some schools that isn't that big of a deal. But I think also the $20 million comes with the fact that anyone that comes to Lanning or his agent with an offer, the text also gets sent to Phil Knight, and Phil Knight just is like, "What do you need to stay here?" And
Mhm.
I think that is, I think that there was probably a lot of speculation with the Texas A&M, with him. I think that I had speculated as well. Like if Phil Knight has a lot of money, but Texas oil money has more money. They just keep drilling it. But I think that this was the one where Phil Knight solidified Dan Lanning never leaving Oregon. I think that he will never have to put up any sort of money for Dan Lanning to stay there. I think that Dan Lanning's speech basically locked him in there for life, and that if
Mhm.
he leaves, he looks like the hypocrite then. I don't think he has any plans of doing that, obviously. But like you said, it's hard as hell to recruit to that part of the country. He does a phenomenal job at it. Everyone wants the swag and everything. Nike does a phenomenal job at that and helping out with that part of it. Um, he's young. He's the Lane Kiffin of the upper west part of the country, basically, in terms of what college kids want as their coach. Um, Speaking of Lane Kiffin, I think that I think he would be the best hire for Alabama at this time. I think the person that they're going to hire is DeBoer from Washington. I think that he's the one that can't turn it down. I think Washington is stuck in the mud in terms of the position they're in. They're going to the Big Ten. They're getting the more money, but this was their team to win it. They're going to have a very hard time getting back to the playoffs, in my opinion, at least in the next 5 years. I think DeBoer is capable of putting up good teams with Washington in the next 5 years if that's where he stays, but I don't think they're capable of winning national championship teams. I think they're going to lose a lot of guys after this season here that's just ended. I think that him taking the job at Alabama would do a lot for him in terms of recruitment, the amount of change just in backing, I think that he would notice. Now, I'm sure that Washington has a lot of backing, but I think that there's a lot of people that love football in Alabama, and there's people that might live in trailers that are willing to put up money for the Alabama football team. I mean, it
Yeah.
goes from all levels. Somebody that owns a Fortune 500 company that loves Alabama, all the way down to whatever the garbage man, whatever.
Mhm.
Everyone that loves it is willing to put any money they can into it to say that they're a part of that team. Uh, yeah, so I think perfect hire, Lane Kiffin. I think that he's the one that wants the job. He's the only one that wants to be the one that follows in Nick Saban's massive footsteps. But I with Kalen DeBoer.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, last thing on Lanning, and I think I kind of started to mention this is, um, if you don't leave for the Alabama job, and you started to talk about this, if you don't leave for the Alabama job where it's at right now, I mean, it's not on the decline. Yeah, they didn't win their semifinal, but they made the semifinal. They just won the SEC. They have I think top two recruiting class coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So if you don't leave for Alabama for where it's at, again, I find it very hard to see any other job, and who knows what happens 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, if it even gets that far. But um, again, just as an Oregon fan, the way that he's come out and spoken about it, and kind of defended everything, and again continued to just restate how much he loves it there. It's refreshing after having to go through Taggart and Cristobal, and maybe he also saw what happened to them, where they left Oregon and now they suck. Who knows? Taggart's not even a coach anymore. Yeah. So looking at who might get hired, um, I don't think Kiffin is even in the discussion. I don't think he's gonna leave Ole Miss with everything that he has built there. Like you said, yes. Um, especially when he was there, he talked about how that was his dream job. I know him and Saban kind of had like a riff towards the end of his tenure there. I believe they repaired that ship. And they speak very highly of each other when they
Play each
faced
other.
off,
Yeah.
or yeah. Um, but again, just with everything, the resources that he's invested to Ole Miss, the recruits he's bringing in, the transfer. We talked about the transfer portal earlier. Um, I don't I don't see him jumping ship. Now, if this job would have opened up maybe another year, or again, if Saban would have said, "Hey, this is going to be my final year," um, maybe it's a different story in that sense. So looking at who would be the best, I think next down the line would be Sarkisian. I don't think Sark's going to leave either, though. But I do agree with you. I believe it's gonna be DeBoer. I tied his name to the Michigan State job when it came open, and looked at everything that um, DeBoer had going for him at that time in terms of recruiting and everything. Obviously, the Michigan State job is well past, but I don't think anybody had it on their radar. And maybe, and we briefly talked about this before we came on. Um, is it's been very publicized that the athletic director wants to sign him to a big extension to keep him there long term. And he's been dragging his feet on extending it. And maybe his initial thought was, well, maybe Harbaugh is going to leave and go to the NFL, and I can find myself in that position, or I'll drag my feet
Mhm.
once that's filled, then I'll sign my extension. I'll stay here at Washington. Now all of a sudden, Alabama of all jobs has opened up. His name is definitely being tied to it. We've already spoken about how his agent is Nick Saban's agent is an SEC guy. Um, I think tomorrow is a day that we find out who the head coach is going to be. Because again, an interesting point I saw brought up by somebody else, and you and I talked about this, is with this agent having so many ties to other people, and especially so many people that are being involved in discussions on who's going to coach Alabama, is he can leverage these discussions into better contracts for his guys at their respective schools already. And so he's going to tinker for it as long as he can before Alabama finally puts their foot down and says, "Listen, either he signs his contract or we're gonna move on to somebody else," and so on. So, I would say tomorrow is when we see it. I don't think we're gonna see anything break tonight, especially it's already 9 o'clock on the East Coast or 8:30 on the East Coast as we're recording here. Um, so I feel like Alabama's gonna wanna catch the news, so maybe first thing in the morning, but I think we're gonna see it tomorrow, and I think it's gonna be DeBoer. So it'd be interesting to see what happens there, and especially if the Michigan job does come open. Do they stay with Moore? Do they go with somebody else? Because if, let's say, the board does sign with Alabama, I don't see anybody out there that would be willing to jump over to Michigan, especially if they're not going to, jump over to the Alabama job. I don't see them jumping over to Michigan. I think Michigan's already built up enough in house. Obviously, Moore got 4 games to audition this year for being a head coach. He did a pretty good job with it. Beating Penn State and Ohio State. He also beat I forget who he played in the first game,
Maryland.
but Maryland, and then whatever FCS school they played. Um, your thoughts on if Michigan would go find anybody else, or do you think it's Moore's job essentially if Harbaugh does leave?
Yeah, I think if DeBoer takes the Alabama job, which I think if he's offered, he would he would regret turning it down. I think.
Uh huh.
Uh, I think if DeBoer's not available, I don't think that there's another name big enough out there that's willing to jump ship for Michigan to hire that would make sense to take over. More like you were saying. I think obviously there's going to be other coaches that we would more than happily go to Michigan, but I think in Michigan's eyes, if they're not getting a huge name, they might as well keep the in-house guy that is there, has been going on the recruiting trips to recruit a lot of the defensive guys. Was auditioned earlier in their season, showed what he's capable of doing with the same offense that Harbaugh had. And so yeah, I think they keep him. I think that had he lost one of those games against Penn State or Ohio State, we're probably looking at a different conversation. But the fact that he was able to beat them both, I think that he's probably top of the list in terms of who Michigan will look for if Harbaugh leaves. And like we both said, we think that that's probably going to happen.
Yeah. Breaking news as we're sitting here talking. Um, Florida State is facing NCAA sanctions for NIL violations. Um, they're facing Mike Norvell does not look like he's in any trouble. It looks like it might be assistant coaches that get suspended. They're also looking at possibly kicking somebody out of the booster association and the NIL collective, all that fun stuff. So a developing story that has just been brought up that I see on Twitter here as I'm trying to scroll and see if they do end up naming a head coach for Alabama right now. Um, Poor Florida State, like they cannot catch a break. And again, I said this before, I'll say it again. The fucking NCAA sucks. And I hate it. They can't do anything. They can't keep anything in a straight line. Everything has to be all over the place and very unorganized. Um, Moving away, let's get into our last topic tonight, and it is going to be another top 5 draft. Um, these are going to be the top 5 best college football games of 2023, including bowl games. Um, Obviously, Nick was supposed to be here, so we're going to give you essentially a top 15, but we'll still give you a top 10, and we'll go from there. And maybe we'll do a analysis video on some of these games later down the line. But Slade, I will let you go first. Give me your number one best game of 2023.
Uh, Number one best game of 2023. I'm going to go with the Rose Bowl. Saban's last game goes to overtime. I think that definitely has to be up there.
Speaking of Saban, I'm going to take the Iron Bowl. That's going to be my number one pick.
I like that. I'm gonna go in a pattern here. I think Saban beating Georgia in his last time against them, SEC championship. I didn't see this happening. I thought that Georgia was going to, go in and it maybe be close and pull away at the end, and that wasn't the case. Alabama was able to win and kind of catch Georgia flat-footed in compared to how they had been the previous 29 games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, my next one, I'm going to take Boise State versus Colorado State. Colorado State came back from, I think it was 4 possessions down in the fourth quarter alone, and then they went on a Hail Mary last second. So I'm going to take Boise State, Colorado State as my number 2 game.
um, Number 3 for me is it's going to be Colorado versus Colorado State. There was so much hype before this game, and going into this, I think Colorado was 2-0 or 3-0 at the time, and Colorado State was 0-2 or 0-3 or something like that. They hadn't won a game yet, and you've got Colorado State's coach talking a lot of smack. Like I don't wear glasses when I talk to people, when I talk to adults. That's kid stuff. Whatever. And it was a crazy game. The game was going back and forth, and it was a game that I thought all these celebrities showed up to this game to watch this because this is the Dion hype train at that time of the season,
Mhm.
and they might get beat by Colorado State, their in-state rival that they should have no business being close with at that time.
No. Um, you know what? Sticking with Colorado, give me Stanford, Colorado. Stanford comes down from 29 back, beats them in overtime. Um, that was a game, again, I respect Dion, and I think he is building something there. I mean, he just needs time. Um, but the amount of people shit talking online, especially Twitter, about oh, Dion's the best and they're going to win a national championship in the first 3 years, and they're still running their mouths. They needed a small slice of humble pie, and blowing a 29-point lead to Stanford of all teams, I think did that. And so, but regardless, it was still a fantastic game. It had a ton of drama. So give me that as my number 3 pick.
Number 4 for me, these teams have to play every year because it just is mayhem. UNC App State, 2 overtimes. UNC looking like they might go down to App State. They get the win in overtime or double overtime, I guess. This is kind of where UNC started their role of wow, they might be the top echelon team of the ACC. Obviously they got to like 6 or 7-0, and then their season kind of unfolded. But yeah, that was a great game.
It was. I'm gonna take the Red River Shootout as my number 4 pick. Uh, Game-winning touchdown, 15 seconds left, and at the time we thought might set up a team to make the playoff. And then Oklahoma found their face a couple weeks later. But regardless, this was still a fantastic game. Obviously, game day was there. There was a ton of hype around it. So that's going to be my number 4 pick.
Number 5, I'm gonna go with Washington, Oregon, the first round. It was a great game. I after had talked about how I thought Lanny not going for the kick before half was a mistake. But yeah, I thought that was a great game. Oregon and Washington were just throwing punches that entire game, back and forth with their offenses.
They were. My number 5. I am going to take the toss up for me between two. I'll give an honorable mention, but my number 5, I'm going to take Notre Dame, Ohio State. Uh, this was the first time game day was there, and I feel like a long time at Notre Dame. So it was a very, very enthusiastic crowd. It was a ton of fun to watch, and then Ohio State scores a game-winning touchdown as time expires. The drama. Then you had Ryan Day screaming about Lou Holtz into the microphone afterwards. It's absurd to be yelling at an 8-year-old man with, I'm pretty sure, dementia, but regardless, ton
Lou
of
Holtz
fun.
doesn't know who Lou Holtz is.
Yeah, ton of fun, and a fantastic game, fantastic environment. So I'm gonna take that as my number 5. My honorable mention was Kansas State, Missouri. That was the other one I was thinking about. 60-yard field goal as time expires from my favorite kicker in the game. Um,
my honorable mention was Notre Dame and Duke. I thought that
Yeah,
if Leonard doesn't get hurt, I think that that game possibly goes to overtime. Duke might just outright win the game. It was a really good game, obviously a very defensive game, but yeah, I like that one.
I think you brought this up before, but I'll remind you. He got hurt on their last offensive play.
Oh yeah, that's my
Yeah.
bad.
Still,
What game
regardless,
did he get
it was
hurt?
still a very good game.
What game did he
He,
get hurt early? What was Who was that against? It was after that then, because
yeah,
he
it,
dealt
it
with
was,
injuries after. I forget who he
yeah,
got.
I can't remember.
My bad.
But I no, it's okay. I just I remember we talked
Yeah,
because I do
yeah.
know
I think we talked about it the very week after it happened, and you told me.
it might have been the UNC game. I think.
Yeah, maybe.
I think so. But I do remember because like he set out the next week. They had a bye, and then he tried to like hurry himself back for the
Mm,
Florida State game, and definitely did not look
no,
100%. And then yeah, there was a he kept playing, and then I think he got hurt a couple weeks later.
hurt.
Yeah. um, so that'll be our top five best games of 2023 for the college football season. It is very sad that the college football season is over, but the podcast will go on. Like we did in the preseason, we will now do a postseason wrap up for every conference. So next week we're going to be here. We're going to wrap up the group of five conferences, knock all five of them out at once, and dive in depth, give you our thoughts on how the season went, and it's some early expectations heading into the 2024 season. And then for the next following weeks, we'll get into all the Power Five conferences individually. So make sure you guys stick with us and check us out there. We are working on some other YouTube videos behind the scene that we're excited to get out. It's going to be a lot of fun. So hopefully you guys check those out as well. But as always, thank you guys so much for spending your day with us. And we will see you guys in the next video.